Good afternoon, everyone. Rick England, Connie Jones, and Elizabeth Feldman here. Rick and Connie are each going to lead off and give an opening statement, and then we'll start taking questions. Go ahead, Rick.
I apologize for having to look at notes. This family's not had a lot of sleep going through all this, so if you'll endure me on that. We're giving the press conference so that our family can get back to some resemblance of a normal life, which we're not sure what that's going to be right now. We wanted time to grieve for the victims of this tragedy. Everybody says that. That's always everybody's opening statement, but I can assure you that we feel deeply for those families. We'd like to find out what life is like without having daily security measures to get through the day. We ask one thing of all of you, is that you not mention our son's name, now or in future broadcasts. I would certainly appreciate that. Don't make him a victim a second or a third time in this. He's been through enough. As records reflect, Connie Jones was married to a deeply troubled man. It ended after a police standoff in 2009 with the Scottsdale Police Department. The divorce was immediately afterwards, and Connie retained attorney Elizabeth Feldman as her divorce attorney. I work for the Feldman Law Office, and Elizabeth Feldman brought me in as an investigator on this case. Not only did I do the investigation, there'd be a time in this situation where I became a protector as well, and it was my job to protect both Connie and her son, simultaneously while conducting investigations that would help in the custody of the minor son. Elaborate measures were taken for their protection. We had 3 safe houses, countless rental cars. We had attack-trained dogs that we had to bring in that were 24-hour security. Dwight Jones repeatedly tried to get through our security, but he was never able to gain access to the family, but it wasn't because he didn't try. For 9 years, Connie and her son have lived in a secure environment. Everything from grocery shopping to going to the movies had to be advanced planning. You don't go to the movie theater and sit in the front row or the middle, you had to sit in the back. You don't go with the grocery store without security with you so that the next aisle over you bump into somebody you shouldn't be bumping into. Any personal habits they had, their favorite place to have a birthday dinner or a Christmas Eve dinner, all this had to be changed. You couldn't do anything that you normally would do. You had to anticipate what would happen because they were married for over 20 years. He understood what this family did and what their traditions were. So we had to basically deprogram them of what they normally would do. It became a way of life to have a different route to work every day, to never go to the same grocery store, to never do anything repeatedly and not allow yourself to become part of a pattern. During this time, Connie was given extensive training in firearms and tactics and defensive driving. And the reason for that was that we had always predicted that he was going to be a threat, but the threat was always going to be aimed at her. We thought that she was going to be the one, we were certain of it, that she was going to be the one that would have this final confrontation. She had to be prepared to deal with it, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I can assure you she was. And there's survivor's guilt with both of us that other people were hurt and that it wasn't Connie or I that had that confrontation with him. During the time that Dwight Jones escalated his behavior, we had planned a cruise 6 months in advance, and we were on a cruise, unaware of anything going on, if there was any attempts to contact anybody, if he was showing up at any of the medical facilities or anywhere we would expected to be. We were unaware of it. We were having fun on a cruise. We came back from the cruise, went immediately to our isolated cabin, and that's where we spent our time doing what we love most. I became aware Friday morning of Dr. Pitt's death, and I've not been impressed by very many people in my life, but I was very impressed with Dr. Pitt. He has a presence when you meet him. and it broke my heart to see this happen. But I didn't associate this to Dwight Jones in any way, shape, or form at that point. I'd heard on the news about the 2 women who were murdered in Scottsdale, but there was no indication of who or where. Saturday afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, I heard they were from the Elizabeth Feldman Law Office, and I immediately knew that this was Dwight Jones. The possibility of the link between Dr. Pitt, who did the in-depth evaluation of his mental status, and Elizabeth Feldman's office, was slim chances of being anybody else. Shortly thereafter, they announced the 3rd crime scene, 4th victim. And I recognized that as Karen Colby's office, both by recognizing the building and by knowing the location. These are 3 locations I had been to many times, and these are 3 locations that Dwight Jones had been to. At that point, I was certain. I reached out to the Phoenix Police Department, Violent Crimes Unit, identified myself. I told them who I thought their suspect was. I told them how the 3 crime scenes were directly linked. That seemed to be of great interest to them because they were still trying to figure out how that 3rd scene came into play. I identified him by date of birth, physical description, and I gave him a description of his vehicle and characteristics that might make it stand out from another vehicle of that same make and model. I also told him where he was at. I knew where he was at because he's been staying at the extended stay for 9 years. My entire family is law enforcement. All my friends are law enforcement. I have never talked to another law enforcement person who has heard of somebody staying in a hotel for 9 years. Occasionally, family members and friends would drive through the parking lot and tell me that his car was still there. We haven't done surveillance on him in years. We were in a protection mode, isolation. Sunday morning, my wife called Scottsdale PD and gave them additional information and provided them the same thing that I had given, but more detailed information to include his phone number. I understand how some of the information we provided at a later time even made it easier to locate him. Approximately 1 a.m., now Sunday morning, we became aware of the YouTube videos. Monday morning, excuse me. Like I said, we're tired. Please give me a break on that one. We made Scottsdale Police Department aware of the YouTube videos. 2 o'clock in the morning, and the lead detective is still working at his desk trying to put this together. Stellar investigation by the Scottsdale Police Department, in my opinion. We made them aware of the videos, and we watched on the news just like all of you did, how everything unfolded. I want you to do one thing for me. I do not want this man portrayed as some brave or heroic person. He's a coward, an absolute coward. He killed 6 people by ambush that did not expect it. He would love to be in the news and love to be the center of attention right now. That's his personality. But I want everybody out there to know he is an absolute coward. A lot of you are going to ask me, you're going to ask 1,000 questions, but I'm going to give kudos out to one law enforcement agency in particular, and that's Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. They had a squad that was the Threat Assessment Squad, run by then Sergeant Jeff Gentry, now Commander. That squad, when everything else failed, attempted to obtain all the information possible on what type of threat that Dwight Jones was going to be. They utilized a departmental criminal psychologist to evaluate the reports, determine he was a threat to himself and others, and they followed him, and they did everything available to them in the Arizona revised statutes. There was nothing they could go after him for. But what they did do is they went to that same extended stay hotel, and they interviewed him. And during that interview, they looked around the room, and one thing became pretty noticeable. He had 2 plates and some shirts hanging up in the closet. What that tells me as somebody who does threat assessments is this is a person who can pick up and leave at a moment's notice. Any of us, if we're going to relocate, there are things of value. We got to get our dog, we got to put stuff in the car, and we got to take some time to close some loose ends. This man literally, at a moment's notice, could leave town and we'd never know where he was. So all that did was escalate the idea that he was going to be a serious threat at one point. Turn it over to Connie at this point.
All right, thank you all for coming. This tragedy has profoundly affected me and my son. Firstly, because we know that we were the primary target for Dwight Jones, and we are very grateful to be alive today. Secondly, we feel great sorrow for the families and for the victims, 6 innocent people who were killed at the hand of a maniac. Dwight was a very troubled man for many years prior to the divorce proceedings. Much of his threatening to me was that if I left him, that he would kill me. He said that he owned me and that I would never be with anybody else. That if I left him, he would kill me. If he couldn't find me, he would find my family. He also many times threatened to take our child. He said he would take him to Mexico and I would never see him again. And he also considered murder-suicide of all 3 of us and murder-suicide of the child and him, because if he killed the child, then that would torture me for the rest of my life. And this is what he's telling me verbatim. He did tell me as well that because of his strong hold on me, again, I am his property, that he could wait for a long time before he got his revenge. That he could wait years, and he would wait until my defenses were down, and then he would act upon that. I entered the court system believing that with all of the evidence that was brought into court, tapes, books, drawings, as well as the expert witness testimony of an internationally renowned forensic psychiatrist, a private investigator with 30 years of law enforcement experience, and a custody evaluator with 20 years of experience, all saying that he was a threat to us, that there was a very high likelihood that he was going to commit crimes against us and be a physical threat to us. I thought that the courts, when they heard that, would help us. They would stop him, but they did not. What he did do was to use the court to further his torture and harassment of me. He had 9 attorneys throughout all of this litigation. So we would start talking about issues, and then we wouldn't hear from someone for 2 months, and then we would hear again. There's a new attorney who doesn't know what the first attorney thought because Dwight's telling them something else. Literally, we went over and over and over multiple issues in the case because we had 9 attorneys to deal with over time, going over different things, and he also, at one point, was his own attorney. Part of the contentiousness of the divorce was, of course, the visitation. I felt this man was a threat to the child. I felt that he was a threat to his emotional and physical safety, which the judge agreed, and yet he was given supervised visits, not no visits. Although he was given those visits, his behavior during the visitations was very erratic. He would call to schedule the appointments on Wednesday, and the facility would say, "We don't have any more." In his mind, that was my fault because he didn't get to see the child that week. But all of this was based on his behavior. Many times he would go for weeks or months without seeing the child, and then when he decided that he wanted to see him again, then we would be again in court, him saying that I'm somehow keeping him from the child. I was court mandated to take him, so I did, although I did not want to. If I didn't take him, then I'm in contempt of court, and I run the risk of them taking the child from me, and that is his parent. That was not an alternative. At one visitation, he did an attempted abduction of the child, and so after that incident, I decided I would absolutely not take him back to that facility. We then researched more secure facilities where there were parameters for them to check his person, to check bags, and the therapist was a PhD psychologist who was really doing more of a counseling session, listening to their interactions at $250 an hour per visit, twice a week, I'm sorry. And so I think what finally stopped the visitations was initially, from the beginning, I had been forced to pay for those visitations. When the court put that burden of payment on him, then it wasn't so important for him, so he stopped going. This man, getting $6,000 a month, could not spend $250 to see his child. As I said in my statement before, after all of this happened, I really have been on high alert for the last 9 years. I expected that he would target me. I knew that one day we would be in a situation where he was trying to kill me. And I felt that I had a personal terrorist. I mean, most people have general risk in life. I had someone who was specifically targeting me, someone who had time and nothing else to do but to think about how to hurt me. His death, I think, is the best thing that's come out of this whole ordeal, and I hope that where he's going, he will finally get what he deserves. Again, I offer prayers and deep condolences to the families who have had to endure this and be affected by this.
Okay. So, why don't you ask the first question?
Sure. So sorry about everything. When was your last encounter with Dwight Jones, when you last actually spoke to him, had any type of relationship, conversation type thing?
After the May 2009 incident, our contact was only through attorneys and in court, and we did not speak to each other directly.
Keeper.
Richard, you mentioned that he was constantly trying to get past your defenses. Can you be more specific on that? I mean, if you hadn't actually had an encounter with him for 9 years, how do you know that he was trying to get past your defenses for that whole time?
Well, for one, we did surveillance. He drove by the hospital where she was at. Number two is there was a determined location she was going to be, which was going to be parenting skills, which is the supervised visit facility. And he would try to time himself where he would arrive early or late. He would be a half a block off where he saw where the parking lot where she would park, hoping that he could see her pull in and then pull in himself. But because of the amount of surveillance we had, she was nowhere in the area until he was parked out of his car and in the facility.
Is that recent, or are you talking
That was
about back during the
visitation times?
What most recent? What incident most recent? I mean, what precipitated this? Was there some encounter? Was there some interaction between any of you that precipitated this murderous spree?
I think that you're going to have to talk to the law enforcement about that in their current investigation.
We did not have any interaction with him and did not feel any particular threat more than our usual baseline. We had always felt that the end of the money would be a big trigger for him. He was someone who was isolated. He stayed in a hotel for 9 years, unable to establish a residence. This is someone who didn't have friends. His bail at the time that he was arrested for the domestic violence incident was $150. And according to his testimony, he didn't know the last names of his friends for someone to pay $150 for his bail. Very isolated man with very limited ability to do anything. And in his perception, I was to be the one to take care of him the rest of his life, which was what, I did. And that to him was my problem.
I'm sorry, but specifically the last time that you were aware of him surveilling you?
You'd have to talk to law enforcement about that.
Alicia, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wondered about just the Flagstaff connection. I know that there was some DNA that was sought here, but what brought you guys here to hold a press conference here, or what the connection is to Northern Arizona?
We're on vacation. We have an isolated cabin.
Steve?
It mystifies me that you were ever married to Dwight Jones in the first place. Who was this man that you married? And what happened to him?
He was not this man. He slowly declined, and in the last couple of years before the 2009 incident was declining pretty rapidly. So certainly, had he been anything like he was at that time or now, it would have been obvious to me. But this was something that came on very slowly and was not detectable for a while. He was a very good imitator. He could, for his purposes, be good for a long time. He could do something, and then if it's in his best interest that I'm not going to leave him or whatever, then he would purposefully do good things, even though his natural instinct would have been to do bad things. He had a very strong self-interest.
When you say, Dr. Jones, when the money ran out, are you talking about when he was having to start paying for these supervised visits and facilities?
No, I think I was talking about the sums of money that he was given during the divorce. So he was given $6,000 a month for 5 years, which is $300 and some $1,000. He was given $97,000 from a checking account. He was given $105,000 from a retirement fund, $26,000 from another retirement fund, $50,000 from our child's college fund, which he said was community property, not the child's college fund. He got 2 years, half of 2 years of tax returns. Again, I subsequently also had to pay some of his attorney's fees because we kept going back and forth to court, and the judge would make me pay his side of the attorney's fees. So he had no reason not to. The issue of the money is that this is a man who is unable to function in life on his own. And it's pretty clear from the fact that he lived in an extended stay with no connection to the community for 9 years, a pretty significant risk factor. And it's my opinion that when the money ran out, that he felt that he could not live a lesser life and he could not provide it for himself. That is one of the reasons I think that he took the last retirement fund in 2016. He had access to that since 2001, but did not take it until 2016 because he was already getting, lots and lots of money already.
Joe?
Richard and Connie, very, very sorry for everything you had to endure the last 10 days. Thank you for answering our questions. A couple of questions related to Dwight's connection to the final two victims, Simmons and Thomas, Mary Simmons and Brian Thomas. Were you aware of how he knew them?
I did not know them, and to my knowledge, he never had friends. The information that you have is the same information I have, that they played tennis, and I can confirm that for the length of time that I knew him, he was a very avid tennis player.
And I'm sorry, Richard, you were complimentary of the way MCSO Threat Assessment Squad did everything they could to try to evaluate the
Correct.
danger of Dwight. In terms of the weekend itself, when you provided the tip to law enforcement, did you end up having any concerns seeing how law enforcement, played this out and handled this over the next couple of days in the way they reacted to your information?
I don't know how they reacted to my information, but we ensured that Connie called Scottsdale the following morning, and I would have continued to call until we ensured somebody was listening, because I didn't think he was going to stop.
So,
Your case is obviously a very extreme case of domestic violence. So many victims out there are going through similar things possibly. But, were there good times? Was he very different when you first met him? And did he suddenly change, or you mentioned a rapid decline?
Well, there were good times. Obviously, I think in the first few years, I think he was pretending to be good. I had good times because I think he was pretending to be so. And he declined over time, but the last few years were a more rapid decline where I could see changes in his appearance. He would have a beard and not cut his hair. He was very depressed. He looked depressed. I had 2 years of psychiatry residency, so I had some idea of kind of how you look at someone who's emotionally distressed. Looking at his eyes, there was nobody in there.
Just to follow up on that, was there ever a mental diagnosis given in his condition? Or?
Not prior to Dr. Pitts. He refused any previous mental health intervention. He said that he was not ill, that I was the one that had the mental illness, and so he would never consent to that.
of course,
He was unemployed for many years. What did he do before he became a stay-at-home dad?
I would correct that as unemployed person. He was a very good babysitter. I was the child's primary care provider. I got him ready for school, did his homework, went to his parent-teacher conferences, went to school to help with the class, went to his activities. Dwight would get up in the morning and drive him to school. That's not a parent. And I'm sorry, what was
his profession?
He was in the Army for 3 years, but never was able to hold a steady job after that. He would work at jobs and would quit within a week because whoever was there was not treating him fairly. There was some issue with that. He's too good to be working there. So he would always have a reason why he couldn't work.
John.
Were you ever aware when he was in the Army if he had any legal troubles?
I was not aware of any, no.
Jessica.
Connie and Rick, was he aware that you two became romantically involved?
Yes.
Could that have possibly triggered any of this?
I don't believe so, because he would have learned that quite some time back.
Did he ever confront either of you because of it?
No.
No.
Laurel, do you have anything? Tony?
Looking back, it sounds like you did everything you could to keep yourself safe, but looking back, is there anything you think you would have changed or wanted to do differently that you think would have added to the protection?
No, just getting out earlier. I think I have used every financial resource, friend resource, professional resource that I possibly could have in this instance, because the only goal for me was for the child to be safe and not to be affected by this person, for him to be able to live his life and not have this as the primary event in his life.
So,
Do you feel as though the courts failed
I do. I think that I think that he got the same consideration as a good father. The courts knew that he was dangerous, abusive. She wrote that in her decree, that she felt that he would harm us. And yet, not only me, but the child. And yet, he got visitation. Even though supervised, it seems to me that if someone is a danger to the child, why are we putting the rights of the parent over the safety of the child? That doesn't make any sense to me. The other issue was that the court, from many experts, knew that he had mental illness issues that needed to be addressed and treated, and they mandated that he do so, but did not do anything to make sure that happened. I do understand that there may be some limitations as to what the court can do to enforce that, but what they could have done is we came back to court over and over and over and over again. It would have been reasonable to say, if you have not done the things that we've already asked you, we don't want to hear from you again until you have done the things that we've asked you. Then we would not have had, 4 more years after the decree in 2010 to be dealing with him, because the court would have put a hold on him. And if he really wanted to do good and he really wanted to do better, he would have to make some effort. He was never, he never had to prove or do anything. They continued to let him do what he wanted.
Steve?
Ms. Feldman, you were an intended target, I believe, of Dwight. What are your reflections looking at what happened in your office and the losses that we suffered there, how tragic that was?
I continue to grieve for 2 people that, for 6 victims and 2 people that I cared deeply about. My paralegal, Valeria, had lived in Arizona for about a year and left a husband and 2 little children. Laura had worked for my partner in our office for over 10 years, and we watched our children grow together. In fact, our oldest daughter would nanny for my daughter at times. We've been connected, and I've known and loved both of them, and I grieve. And Laura leaves behind 3 children and a grandchild also, and a husband. And I grieve for them all the time. I don't know who, what, where, why was his intended target. It obviously had a connection with my office. It obviously had a connection with Dr. Pitt and with Karen Colby, because it was all related to Connie and Dr. Jones. But I don't know what was going on in his head. That's why we hired somebody like Dr. Pitt, and unfortunately he's going to be missed also.
Joe?
And is there anything you could add to what Connie said related to whether you feel the courts failed or the system failed in some way or another? There is an Arizona Supreme Court justice that said he is reviewing this entire case because he wants to see if there is something that could be done differently in the future policy-wise, whether it relates to, again, the courts or even his ability to get access to a gun, etc. Anything you would add?
A few things. One is I think the blame, so to speak, lies with all of us and our representatives. I think I certainly understand where all my clients come from, including Connie here. I think under the circumstances, however, the court system worked pretty well this time. I would say I think the judge did a great job in this case. we're tied, how about that, by limited resources and a lot of needs. The world's not perfect, including having very awful people without help and way too easy access to weapons. So if you start the basic premise, which is that if he hadn't had a gun and hadn't had access to so many guns, and here's somebody who had been arrested in a violent episode, let alone everything else. But let's just say he was arrested in a violent episode with a gun. How somebody like that can continue to possess guns and possess them legally, that's, I think, where we need to start. But that's my issue.
Anything you would add to what you just said?
Well, I think certainly if they had not pled him down to disorderly conduct, he would have had a more significant claim on his record, and then he would not have been able to carry a gun. I had 4 orders of protection in 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012, all stating that we had reason to believe that there was a continued threat. One of them was because of the attempted abduction at the parenting skills, and the other was when we were at the new facility putting a sun visor in the front of his car that says, "Love kills slowly." I took this as a very personal threat to me. However, the problem is if he doesn't do anything within that year, you don't have any grounds to then have another order of protection granted. And so we didn't have an order of protection, which is just a piece of paper anyway, but we had to continue our vigilance because I still knew that this was a man that would not stop until he got me.
Sonia?
Ms. Feldman, we were told that everyone connected to this case was put on, I guess, notice, so to speak, with security. When did you find out, and were you given that opportunity to kind of protect yourself, or what happened?
I was probably, I'm sorry, I was going to say I was one of the first people to talk to the police, but obviously people in Dr. Pitt's circumstances were. With regards to my office, I was the first person there that they talked to, and they asked me, and the first person I thought of was Dwight, and I told them, and that was Friday night. So certainly they, to answer your question, the answer is Scottsdale Police were always willing to take my call. They called me. They were attentive, helpful, etc. And I tried to not call them and not bother them and not ask them questions so they could do their jobs and do their work. But they were very helpful to my firm, to me, to the people surrounding me.
So it was Friday night, you told them you thought it would be Dwight. Of all the cases you have, what was it on him that stood out?
Well, they asked me, a couple of questions. Were there any arguments in the office? All the kind of standard things that you see on TV. They asked me about any cases. And at that time, they said any cases connected to Dr. Pitt. And the only one I had that there was any violence was Dwight. And so that's when I mentioned it. And I probably threw out a couple of other potential people that they might want to talk to or that I might want to talk to that I would have been concerned about but didn't have any connection to Dr. Pitt. And then the third location, fourth murder happened, and I didn't know about the connection between that gentleman and Karen Colby until I talked to Connie.
Michael, didn't one of your colleagues that night identify someone else, because we had another name that was floating around that night before Dwight Jones came up?
There were...
I'm not going to mention the name because of the camera.
There were, I've never felt so popular or unpopular in my life. Their phones were going off and texts. There were people, all over the place suggesting all sorts of things. I tried not to listen or pay any attention unless a police officer told me, or I saw media saying something, because it was, and, you know, understandably so, it was a minefield of names.
Sonia?
You know, there are some people, especially in the legal community, that have reached out to us and said that they felt that Scottsdale police were a little slow in responding. Do you think they should have put out his picture, his mugshot much sooner? Could that have made a difference?
That's not my job to oversee what the police officers did or didn't do. They were great to me.
And I would second that. My experience with them was that they were very interested. They took it very seriously. They returned my calls promptly. They followed up with me in a reasonable time. So my experience with Scottsdale was very good.
Felicia?
Yeah, obviously this is a dramatic turn in your life to where the point where you don't have to constantly be on guard about this man and not have the kind of protection at the grocery store or the movie theater. How do you just anticipate kind of the lifting of that burden, still knowing, you know, other families who are impacted, but moving forward and how you live your lives without constantly having to look over your shoulder?
Well, it will be a gradual thing. It's become my personality. It's, you know, I don't know that I can go out and just not look and see who's around me. Obviously, there are other bad people in the world, so it's not necessarily a bad skill to have, but maybe not as intense. But I think it will take some time for it to go back to a normal.
Tony?
Ms. Feldman, do you have some reflections or thoughts about all this time you and Dr. Connie going through some ordeal together? Any thoughts about that?
Oh, I like that question. Sure, yes, definitely. Connie has been a client, a good client, an exemplary client, but more than that. We have been friends. As my little aside is, there was a time that my daughter had meningitis. I didn't know she had. Anyway, Connie came and held my hand at the hospital for a good 6 hours, and then came back the next day to make sure that my daughter was okay. And those are things she didn't have to do, and most clients wouldn't do that. And you try to have some boundaries with clients. I am thrilled that she is happy with Rick, and that they have this wonderful family, and that they get to move on and continue to enjoy their lives and continue to do good things. And I hope we all can, and I hope we all can learn whatever lessons that we can take from this and be kind to each other.
Joe?
For any women who may be watching tonight who may be in a domestic violence situation, can you describe briefly, Connie, sort of how you and Dwight met, why it was a positive thing at first, and what the first sign or two were that he needed help or something needed to change?
Well, I guess I can sum it up with a quote by Maya Angelou. She says that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. The problem with women and anyone in a relationship is that you have an emotional attachment to that person, so you tend to also give them excuses. And so when there are some things that aren't excusable, you should not do to someone that you love. And if it's one of those things, you know, being verbally abusive, hitting you, that should stop. And you should say, this is not something that someone could change, because someone who truly loved you would not do that. And again, I think many times because of the persistence of the abuser in the fact that they're sorry and they didn't mean it and they're never going to do it again, it's not going to stop. It's going to get worse.
Did you meet while he was in the Army?
I'm sorry?
Did you meet while he was in the Army?
Yes, yes.
Sonia?
Dr. Jones, with everything you've been through for the last 10 years and just the pain over the last few weeks that you've gone through, that moment when you got that call or heard that he's gone?
Very happy. relief in my chest that this, for me at least, would be the last that I had to deal with him.
Yes, oh,
Can I,
go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about your relationship. You started doing security for her, and that bond obviously grew. Just how has this experience strengthened your relationship? I mean, did you view him as your personal cop by your side 24 hours a day, practically?
Well, during the time that he was doing surveillance and security for us, we spent a lot of time together with his many years of experience in strategy and my knowledge of Dwight and his habits. I think we were a good team because we could anticipate things because he had the knowledge that he needed so that he could determine what type of security measures to take. And because of that, we spent hours and hours together, you know, talking, and, you know, we were around each other. And we, of course, when you are, you know, around someone that much, you talk about personal things and you get to know them as a person. And we became friends.
All right, anyone else? That's it.
Dr. Kenny.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Interesting.